Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's, this expectation of absolute precision. Like you break an arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the fracture.
Right, it's binary. It's either broken or it's not.
Exactly. And we crave that kind of certainty.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. We prefer our problems to be visible, easily categorized, strictly biological, if possible.
Right. But the moment you step into the world of addiction, and specifically alcohol, that x-ray machine becomes entirely useless.
Yeah, completely.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just murky and layered. So today, we are doing a deep dive into a persistent, honestly terrifying question that so many of you have asked yourselves, usually in those quiet, 3 a.m. moments.
It's a big one.
Yeah. Did you inherit the alcoholic gene?
We're breaking down the critical difference between genetic destiny and inherited family patterns.
And, the overarching narrative for a lot of people is that their relationship with alcohol is this pre-written genetic script.
Right, like a biological life sentence. Exactly, a sentence they feel they just can't escape. But the sources we're examining today, they completely dismantle that narrative. They reveal this really complex, nuanced, and honestly, ultimately hopeful reality about how we as humans learn to process stress.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our source material today is this really insightful collection of articles and videos from Susan Gast, specifically from her website, livebettersober.com.
Yeah, her work is fantastic.
It really is. And to give you some necessary context, Susan quit drinking at age 37, and she's been completely sober since 1998.
Wow, so by January 2028, she'll hit 30 years alcohol-free.
Right, which is huge.
It's massive. And I mean, that represents decades of actual lived experience, right? It really elevates her insights way beyond just theoretical observations.
Totally.
She brings this really calm, highly practical perspective to a topic that is, let's face it, almost always shrouded in panic and shame.
Yeah, that shame element is so heavy.
Yeah.
But let's start at the root of the curiosity here, the biological component, before we navigate into the psychology.
Makes sense.
Because in Susan's materials, she offers a very direct answer to this question of the alcoholic gene. She doesn't dismiss the biology entirely. Family history can absolutely influence your alcohol risk.
Right. It creates a vulnerability or a sensitivity.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But she is emphatic on one point.
Yeah.
It is not a life sentence.
And that's key, right? A vulnerability is not a guarantee.
Right.
The distinction between those two concepts basically dictates how you view your entire future.
So as I was reading through her notes, I tried to visualize how that vulnerability actually functions in the real world. And I thought of it like this. Is inheriting the quote-unquote alcoholic gene less like inheriting a ticking time bomb that will eventually go off no matter what, and more like, say, inheriting a house in a flood zone?
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like the location, your genetics significantly increases the risk.
Yeah.
But whether the house actually floods still depends on the weather and, the structural defenses you build around it.
Your environment and your habits. That house in the flood zone analogy, I mean, it captures the exact mechanical nuance of Susan's argument. If we connect this to the bigger picture, genetic predisposition isn't this dormant monster just waiting to wake up and hijack your nervous system.
Right. It's not inevitable.
Exactly. A genetic sensitivity to alcohol requires repeated, sustained exposure over time to actually take hold.
You have to experience the weather repeatedly.
Yeah, and you have to lack the sandbags, right? The healthy coping mechanisms to keep the water out.
Let's get into the physical mechanics of that vulnerability for a second, because I think it's fascinating. When we say someone has a genetic sensitivity to alcohol, what is actually happening in their body compared to someone who doesn't have it?
Well, it happens on a few levels, but it primarily involves liver enzymes and the neurological reward system.
Okay.
So for someone with this genetic predisposition, their brain's reward center might respond to alcohol with an abnormally high dopamine spike.
Like way higher than average.
Way higher. They get this massive rush of euphoria, and conversely, they might also lack the standard physiological braking system.
Wait, what do you mean by braking system?
Well, you know how a lot of people feel sedated, sluggish, or even a bit sick after a couple of drinks?
Yeah, sure.
That naturally tells them to stop. But someone with a genetic vulnerability might not feel those negative physiological cues as strongly.
Oh, wow.
Right. So they get all the chemical reward and very little of the immediate physical consequence.
So their brain is essentially getting this megaphone message that says, this is the greatest feeling ever. Keep going.
Exactly.
But even with that amplified chemical message, the gene itself still doesn't, pour the drink?
No, it doesn't. The gene dictates your internal chemical reaction to the liquid, but it does not force your hand to lift the glass.
Right.
Activating that biological vulnerability into a full-blown dependency that requires a learned routine. It requires the physical habit of drinking to be established in the first place.
So if genetics simply build the house in the flood zone, we have to look at what actually brings the rain.
Yeah, the environment.
Right, because Susan argues that the trigger isn't biological, it's environmental, which shifts the whole focus from the DNA we acquire at conception to the invisible inheritance we receive during childhood.
I love that phrase, invisible inheritance.
Yeah.
Because children absorb far more than words.
They really do.
We always assume family influence is mostly about explicit instruction, right? Sitting kids down and telling them how to behave.
Right. Don't do this, do this.
Exactly. But children are master observers of patterns. They study the adults around them just to figure out how to survive and navigate the pressures of life.
They're essentially recording emotional reactions.
Yes.
Because Susan notes that when alcohol is normalized in a family environment, kids inherit these deeply ingrained blueprints regarding stress management.
They watch a parent come home from a demanding day at work, sigh heavily, and immediately pop open a beer or a bottle of wine.
Right, just to transition from stress mode to relaxation mode.
Exactly. And the child is taking mental notes. They're not just observing that their parents drink.
Observing the why.
Yes. They see that their parents use this specific chemical compound to manage their emotional equilibrium, to create peace.
Wow.
Furthermore, alcohol kind of becomes the universal punctuation mark for every emotion.
Oh, totally. Good day, bad day.
Right. It's used to soothe a bad day, celebrate a good day, lubricate social awkwardness. It's everywhere.
So let me ask a probing question here, just on behalf of the listener who's maybe analyzing their own childhood environment right now.
Sure.
If a person grows up watching their parents use alcohol to manage literally every emotional event, how exactly does that transfer happen? Like, at what point does the parent's coping mechanism literally become the child's automatic reflex?
Well, it happens through years of steady emotional conditioning. Think of it like carving a groove into a vinyl record. Every time a parent experiences stress and uses alcohol to relieve it, they are demonstrating a pathway. The child's brain registers that sequence. Stress occurs, alcohol is consumed, relief follows.
Wow.
And that groove gets carved a little deeper each time the child witnesses the cycle.
And then the child grows up. They face their own adult stressors, a demanding boss, financial crisis, an argument with a spouse.
And their brain naturally scans its archives for a solution.
It's looking for that groove.
The human brain always seeks the most familiar path of least resistance to alleviate distress. So the needle naturally drops into the groove that was carved during those formative years.
Yeah.
If the deepest, most thoroughly reinforced model for emotional relief is alcohol, well, that becomes the automatic reflex.
So when you're sitting on the couch at 8 p.m., you're feeling overwhelmed and you're craving a drink. You might be fighting a learned emotional coping system that was installed before you ever took your first sip.
Absolutely.
You aren't just battling your own biology. You're battling the conditioning of the environment you were raised in.
And recognizing that conditioning is the very first step out of the trap.
Right.
Because believing you inherited a behavioral pattern is fundamentally different from believing you inherited a biological mandate.
Yes, because a pattern can be broken.
Exactly. A behavioral pattern, no matter how deeply ingrained it is or how many years it's been running in the background, it was learned. And because it was learned, it can absolutely be unlearned.
That distinction right there between a learned behavior and a biological mandate, that brings us to a really severe psychological trap. When people ignore their environmental conditioning and blame only their genetics, they step into this really dangerous territory with the labels they attach to themselves.
The danger of labels is such a central theme in Susan's work.
Yeah, she hates them.
She really does. She strongly warns against adopting language that makes individuals feel broken or powerless or, permanently damaged.
We're destined to fail.
Yeah.
Because the vocabulary we use internally dictates our external actions.
100%.
If someone adopts the mindset of, well, I inherited this alcoholic gene, my grandfather had it, my mother had it, so there's nothing I can do, they are completely removing hope from the equation.
They are.
And hope isn't just some cheesy motivational poster concept here.
No. Hope is the actual psychological fuel required to initiate and sustain any kind of behavioral change.
Right.
When you tell your brain the fight is already lost because of your DNA, you remove all incentive to try. I mean, you're not going to endure the intense discomfort of building new routines if your fundamental belief is that the outcome is predetermined.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If someone has been struggling with alcohol for a decade, they're carrying immense shame, they're hiding bottles, they're feeling profound guilt about their inability to stop, wouldn't slapping the quote-unquote genetics label on the problem provide some necessary relief? Like, wouldn't it feel liberating to look in the mirror and say, it's not my fault, it's my DNA? Doesn't that absolve them?
It absolutely provides a temporary hit of relief. I mean, it immediately alleviates that crushing weight of moral failure.
Right.
But, and this is but it is a devastating long-term trade-off.
Why?
Because you trade your guilt for your agency by saying, it is entirely my DNA. You might stop blaming yourself in the short term, but you implicitly accept that you are doomed.
You give up your power.
Exactly. Believing you are fundamentally flawed at a genetic level provides this eternal excuse to not do the agonizing work of building healthier routines, which this raises an important question. What happens to your psychological trajectory the moment you realize you are not powerless?
Oh, the trajectory violently shifts toward action.
Yes.
Susan actually writes about this as one of her own major breakthroughs. She realized alcohol was deeply wired into her routines and her emotional patterns, but because they were just patterns, they could be dismantled.
Exactly.
We don't have to stay in the flood zone just because our parents built a house there.
I love that. Reclaiming your agency means shifting your focus from the unchangeable past, your genetic makeup, your childhood environment, to the malleable present.
The things you can control.
Right. It allows you to actually construct a new defense system.
So let's pivot from the problem to the solution and look at what building that defense system actually entails. How do we interrupt and rewire these deeply ingrained habits?
Susan provides incredibly practical tools for this.
She does. And they're all rooted in the mechanics of habit formation, starting with the notorious evening craving.
The evening craving is, for most people, the highest hurdle. Susan asks us to examine why the urge to drink hits so much harder at night.
Right, because it's rarely about physical thirst or even physical dependency in the early stages.
No, it's driven by the collapse of the day's structural demands.
Yes.
During the workday, you're distracted, you have tasks, meetings, social obligations, keeping your brain occupied.
But at 7 p.m., all that falls away.
You're left completely alone with your baseline emotional state and whatever residual stress has accumulated over the last 10 hours.
Right, and the brain recognizes that the external pressure is off, and it immediately demands its habitual transition mechanism. It needs to downshift the nervous system.
And for many, that deeply carved groove dictates that the transition mechanism must be a drink.
So to combat that specific evening urge, Susan introduces this concept called tomorrow me thinking.
It's brilliant.
It is. It's this cognitive strategy where you essentially talk yourself out of a drink tonight by focusing entirely on how you will feel when you wake up tomorrow.
Yeah.
But how does that actually work mechanically in the brain?
Well, it's basically a deliberate tug of war between two different regions of the brain. When a craving hits, your limbic system, that's the emotional impulsive center, is screaming for immediate short-term relief.
It wants the dopamine spike right now.
Right now. But tomorrow me thinking forces you to engage your prefrontal cortex, which handles logic, planning, long-term consequences. So by vividly visualizing the next morning, the clear head, the lack of a headache, the absence of shame, you strengthen the prefrontal cortex's ability to override the limbic system's demand for instant gratification.
You're basically treating your future self like a friend you genuinely care about, rather than prioritizing the immediate comfort of your present self.
Exactly.
But let's look at a scenario where the automatic routine is just moving faster than your prefrontal cortex can even process. Susan has this article titled, "I already poured a drink. Now what?"
Yeah, because the habit loop operates so smoothly that sometimes you find yourself standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine in your hand before you've even consciously made a decision to pour it.
Your body just ran the script.
It ran the script.
And that is the exact moment the all-or-nothing trap springs shut. You look at the glass, and the brain says, well, I already poured it. I might as well drink it. The streak is broken. The night is ruined. I'll just start over tomorrow.
But Susan points out that pouring the drink and taking the sip are two entirely different actions.
Yes. You can pause. You can pour it down the sink.
Now, we have to acknowledge how monumentally difficult that action actually is in practice.
Oh, brutal.
Pouring a freshly poured drink down the sink feels physically repulsive to a brain that is expecting a reward.
Because the anticipation has already started the chemical reaction, right? Like the brain is already revving the engine.
Exactly. The moment you decide to pour the drink or even just walk toward the kitchen, your brain begins releasing dopamine.
Wow.
Dopamine isn't just the reward chemical, it's the anticipation and motivation chemical. You get a massive spike before the liquid ever touches your lips.
So when you try to interrupt that process and dump the drink, you are fighting this massive physiological wave of momentum.
It feels like slamming the brakes on a speeding car.
Which makes recognizing that friction so important. It is supposed to feel agonizing.
Yes, it means it's working.
Right. But if you can endure that friction for just a moment and pour the liquid away, you break the illusion of powerlessness. You prove to your own nervous system that the routine is not an unstoppable force.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
Yeah. For those intense, deeply entrenched urges that logic alone just cannot touch, Susan teaches this psychological tool she calls the somatic marker method.
Okay, a somatic marker is essentially a visceral, physiological reaction linked to a specific past experience, right?
Exactly.
So Susan's method involves intentionally surfacing powerful, negative memories of drinking. The physical pain, the exhaustion, that deep shame that made you want to quit in the first place, and using the emotional weight of those memories to crush the immediate craving.
To understand why this works, we have to look at how craving manipulates memory.
Okay, tell me more.
Craving relies entirely on romanticizing alcohol. The brain highlights the initial warmth and relaxation of the first glass and conveniently blocks out the misery of the hangover or that horrible argument you had at midnight.
It's like selective amnesia.
Completely. So the somatic marker method uses the amygdala, the brain's emotional memory center, to fight back against that romanticized illusion.
You're using the brain's own vivid catalog of negative consequences to override the dopamine hit of the craving.
Yes.
You force your nervous system to remember the actual outcome, not the fantasy outcome.
You vividly recall the nausea, the pounding headache, the crushing anxiety of waking up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing. You bring that physical sensation into the present moment.
Right.
And that visceral memory creates a negative emotional charge that is strong enough to neutralize the dopamine-driven craving.
And Susan teaches these tools within a specific 66-day framework. Is the 66 days related to how long it actually takes for those neural pathways to prune themselves? Like, are we physically altering the brain's wiring over that period?
You hit the mechanism exactly.
Okay.
Research in habit formation shows that on average, it takes about 66 days of consistent action for a new behavior to become automatic.
Fascinating.
Over those 66 days, the old neural pathways, those deep grooves in the record associated with drinking, they begin to physically weaken from disuse. This is neuroplasticity in action.
And at the same time, you're laying down new tracks.
Right.
By consistently practicing tomorrow, me thinking, pausing the routine to pour the drink out, and using the somatic marker method, you're proving to your nervous system that it can handle evening stress without chemical intervention.
You're building a new default setting.
It is the ultimate counter-argument to the idea of being doomed by an alcoholic gene.
It really is.
You are actively constructing a new internal environment.
Yeah.
You're effectively building the sandbags to protect the house in the flood zone.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you today? To bring this all together for you listening, the core takeaway from Susan Gast's decades of lived experience in this whole practical methodology is profoundly empowering.
It is.
If you've been staring at your family tree with a sense of dread, believing your future was already written in your DNA, know this. You are not permanently doomed by a gene.
No, you're not.
You inherited an environment. You inherited learned behaviors, mirrored emotional reactions, and automatic routines. And the most liberating truth about any learned behavior is that it can absolutely be unlearned.
That is the very foundation of Live Better Sober. As Susan gently reminds us, change can begin one day at a time.
Just one day.
It requires dismantling the fear, dropping those heavy labels that keep you trapped, and focusing on the daily practice of building healthier routines. The peace, clarity, and emotional freedom that emerge when alcohol no longer dictates your evenings, that is a reality you can construct, regardless of the environment you were raised in or the genetics you carry.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on a striking idea from one of Susan's articles titled The drunk version of you isn't the real you.
Oh, that's a powerful one.
It really is. We've talked a lot today about inheritance, the biological sensitivities we carry, the coping mechanisms we mirror from our parents, and the flood zones we find ourselves standing in. But think about this. If the drunk version of you isn't the real you, and your family's historical stress responses aren't actually biologically hardwired into your DNA, then who is the real you, waiting just beneath all those inherited habits?